The animal kingdom operates according to principles that often seem harsh and unforgiving by human standards, where differences from the norm can mean rejection, vulnerability, and even death. In species with rigid social hierarchies and clearly defined roles based on physical characteristics, individuals who deviate from expected appearance or behavior frequently face discrimination, exclusion, or aggression from their own kind. This is particularly true in species where physical traits serve as crucial signals of sex, age, health, or genetic quality, where animals make rapid assessments of others based on visual cues that have been honed by millions of years of evolution to quickly categorize individuals and determine appropriate responses. Among lions, few physical characteristics are more significant or symbolic than the mane of the adult male. That magnificent growth of thick, often dark hair that frames the face and extends down the neck and shoulders, creating the iconic image that has made lions the symbol of royalty, courage, and power across countless human cultures throughout history and around the world. The male lion's mane serves multiple crucial functions in lion society and ecology that go far beyond mere appearance or decoration. It is a visual signal of maturity, health, and genetic quality, with darker, fuller manes generally indicating males in their prime with good nutrition, robust health, and superior genetics that females find attractive and rivals find intimidating. The mane serves a vital protective function during fights, providing cushioning that can reduce injury from bites and claw strikes to the vulnerable neck region during the violent territorial battles between competing males that frequently result in serious injury or death. It functions as an intimidation display that makes males appear larger and more formidable to potential rivals, often deterring challenges before they escalate to actual combat and saving both parties from the risks of serious injury. And it serves as a signal of attractiveness to females, with extensive research demonstrating that lionesses show clear preference for males with darker, fuller manes when given choices among potential mates, suggesting the mane functions as an honest signal of male quality that has been favored by sexual selection over evolutionary time. In evolutionary terms, the mane is both a sexually selected trait that females find attractive and a product of male-male competition that helps determine which males gain access to reproductive opportunities and which are excluded from breeding entirely. Given the mane's importance in virtually every aspect of male-lion social interaction, competitive success, and reproductive achievement, a male lion born without the ability to develop this crucial characteristic would seem destined for a life of hardship, rejection, and likely early death. Unable to signal his sex and maturity appropriately to other lions, unable to protect his neck during fights that would be essential to establishing and maintaining any territorial claim, unable to intimidate rivals or attract mates through the visual impact of a magnificent mane, such an individual would appear to be at a catastrophic disadvantage in the intensely competitive world of lion social dynamics, where only the most impressive males achieve breeding success and most males die without ever siring offspring. Yet this is precisely the situation faced by a young male lion born in early 2019 in the Serengeti ecosystem of Tanzania, a cub whose unusual condition would lead to a story that challenged fundamental assumptions about lion behavior and social dynamics, demonstrated unexpected flexibility in how these animals respond to difference within their social groups, revealed the complex interplay between appearance and function in animal societies, and ultimately went viral when the story was shared with global audiences, touching millions of people who saw in this young lion's experience reflections of universal themes about acceptance, adaptation, overcoming adversity, and the complex ways that communities respond to members who don't fit the expected patterns or conform to established norms. The story begins in a pride that had been studied intensively by researchers for over a decade as part of a long-term monitoring project focused on understanding lion population dynamics, genetics, behavioral ecology, and the various factors that determined reproductive success and survival in this iconic species. The pride consisted of 5 adult lionesses who formed the stable core of the group, 2 adolescent females who had been born into the pride and had not yet dispersed, One dominant adult male, approximately 6 years old, who had taken control of the pride 3 years earlier after defeating the previous coalition, and various cubs of different ages representing multiple litters sired by the current dominant male with different females in the pride. The pride's territory encompassed a section of the Serengeti known for excellent prey availability, including abundant zebra and wildebeest populations, reliable water sources that didn't dry up even during the harshest drought periods, and good cover for hunting and denning, making it prime real estate in the competitive landscape of lion territories where the best areas were always contested and required constant vigilance to defend. The dominant male, a magnificent specimen with a particularly dark and impressive mane that extended well down his shoulders and chest, had held his position for approximately 3 years by the time our story begins, and during that tenure had successfully defended his territory against numerous challengers, had sired multiple litters of cubs with various pride females, and had established himself as one of the most successful and formidable males in this section of the Serengeti. In January 2019, one of the pride's prime-aged females, an experienced mother who had successfully raised previous litters, gave birth to a new litter of 3 cubs in a secluded den site located among rocky outcrops that provided excellent shelter and protection during the critical early weeks of life, when cubs are most vulnerable to predators, exposure to elements, and various other threats that make infant mortality rates in lions disturbingly high even under the best circumstances. The birth was documented by researchers through a network of motion-activated camera traps positioned strategically near known den sites throughout the pride's territory, allowing the research team to monitor the cub's development, record the mother's maternal behaviors, and track early survival without physically disturbing the family or causing stress to the protective mother, who would be hypervigilant about threats during this vulnerable period. The litter appeared entirely healthy, initially based on the camera trap footage, with all 3 cubs nursing successfully and showing the robust activity levels and rapid growth that indicated good maternal care and adequate milk production. The cubs were growing at appropriate rates for their age, beginning to display the playful, exploratory behaviors characteristic of young lions as they approached 6 to 8 weeks of age and started venturing outside the den for brief periods while still returning to the safety of the rocky shelter when tired or when the mother signaled danger. But as the cubs continued to develop and their features became clearer and more distinct through the increasingly detailed camera trap footage that captured them at progressively closer range, researchers began to notice something unusual and unprecedented about one of the males in the litter. While his 2 siblings, one male and one female, were developing completely normally with physical features and growth patterns that matched established baselines for lion cub development in the Serengeti population, this particular male cub showed a distinctive and troubling pattern of hair growth that was strikingly different from anything researchers had observed in their combined decades of studying this lion population. The fine, downy fur that covered his entire body as a young infant, typical of all lion cubs regardless of sex, failed to develop the texture changes and distribution shifts that normally preceded mane growth in young male lions as they matured through their first several months of life. As weeks passed and the cub reached 2 and then 3 months of age, the time when the earliest subtle signs of future mane development should have been appearing around the head and neck region, the characteristic thickening of hair in these areas simply didn't occur as it should have. By the time the cubs were approaching 4 months old and the mother was beginning to bring them out of the den for longer periods to interact with the broader pride, to be introduced to other pride members, and to begin the socialization process that would integrate them into the complex social structure of the group, it was abundantly clear to the experienced researchers monitoring this family that the young male had some kind of condition, either genetic or hormonal or developmental, that would likely prevent normal mane development entirely, leaving him as possibly the first documented case of a completely maneless male lion born and surviving in this well-studied Serengeti population. The fine, downy fur that covered his entire body as a young infant, typical of all lion cubs regardless of sex, failed to develop the texture changes and distribution shifts that normally preceded mane growth in young male lions as they matured through their first several months of life. As weeks passed and the cub reached 2 and then 3 months of age, the time when the earliest subtle signs of future mane development should have been appearing around the head and neck region, the characteristic thickening of hair in these areas simply didn't occur as it should have. By the time the cubs were approaching 4 months old, and the mother was beginning to bring them out of the den for longer periods to interact with the broader pride, to be introduced to other pride members, and to begin the socialization process that would integrate them into the complex social structure of the group, it was abundantly clear to the experienced researchers monitoring this family that the young male had some kind of condition, either genetic or hormonal or developmental, that would likely prevent normal mane development entirely, leaving him as possibly the first documented case of a completely maneless male lion born and surviving in this well-studied Serengeti population. The research team, led by Dr. Sarah Mwangi, a Tanzanian wildlife biologist who had dedicated nearly 20 years of her professional life to understanding lion genetics, behavioral ecology, and the various factors that determined individual success or failure in wild lion populations, immediately recognized the profound significance of what they were observing through their camera trap network. Male lions without manes were extraordinarily rare in wild populations, so uncommon that most researchers went entire careers spanning decades without ever encountering such an individual, and the few documented cases in the scientific literature typically involved very specific circumstances, like genetic abnormalities affecting hormone production, endocrine disorders disrupting the normal developmental pathways controlled by testosterone, or unusual environmental factors that somehow interfered with the physiological processes governing mane growth. Dr. Mwangi understood that this cub represented a unique opportunity to study how lion social dynamics would respond to such a dramatic deviation from normal male appearance, how the absence of the mane would affect the cub's treatment by pride members and his trajectory through different life stages, and what this case might reveal about the relative importance of visual signals versus other forms of communication and assessment in lion society. She immediately organized an effort to collect biological samples from the unusual cub during the next scheduled health assessment and monitoring session with this particular pride, hoping to identify the underlying cause of his condition through genetic testing that could reveal mutations affecting relevant genes, hormone analysis that could show whether testosterone production was abnormal, and various other diagnostic approaches that might explain why this cub was developing so differently from every other male lion the team had ever studied. The opportunity for this detailed examination came several weeks later when the pride was temporarily immobilized using carefully calculated doses of tranquilizer drugs for a routine health check that the research team conducted periodically, and for the fitting of a GPS collar on the dominant male that would allow researchers to track the pride's movements continuously and gather detailed data on territorial use, hunting patterns, and interactions with neighboring prides. The brief window while the pride was sedated allowed researchers to also quickly but thoroughly examine the cubs, take standard measurements of size and weight, assess their overall health status, and most importantly, for understanding the maneless cub's condition, collect small blood and tissue samples that would be sent to specialized laboratories for comprehensive analysis. The examination of the unusual cub, whom the research team had begun calling Asali, a Swahili word meaning honey, in reference to his unusually light-colored coat that lacked the darker tones typically associated with developing males, revealed that he was otherwise completely healthy by every measure the team could assess in the field. His body condition was excellent with appropriate fat stores and muscle development for his age. His cardiovascular and respiratory function appeared normal based on heart rate and breathing patterns. His teeth were coming in properly with no abnormalities. His eyes and ears showed no defects or signs of disease, and his behavior during the brief examination, the way he responded to handling and stimuli, suggested entirely typical lion-cub temperament and neurological function. But the laboratory analysis of the samples collected during this examination would later reveal through sophisticated genetic sequencing that Asali carried a rare mutation affecting specific genes in the complex regulatory network responsible for androgenic hair growth. the specialized physiological process through which testosterone and related hormones trigger the development of the characteristic male mane during adolescence and early adulthood. The mutation, which appeared to be a spontaneous occurrence rather than something inherited from either parent based on analysis of the parent's genetics, meant that Asali's cells simply couldn't respond normally to the hormonal signals that should have triggered mane growth, even though his testosterone production appeared to be completely normal based on hormone assays. This meant that Asali would never develop a mane regardless of his testosterone levels, overall health status, nutritional condition, or any other factor that normally influenced mane quality and fullness in male lions. He would mature into an adult male lion with entirely normal reproductive function, normal male typical aggression and territorial instincts, normal size and strength and fighting ability, but completely without the single most important and recognizable visual marker of male lion identity and status. Dr. Mwangi and her research team understood immediately that they were documenting what amounted to a natural experiment of extraordinary scientific value, one that could provide unique insights into fundamental questions about how much of lion social behavior and competitive dynamics was truly dependent on the mane as a visual signal versus other factors like actual size and strength. Behavioral displays of aggression and dominance, scent markers that communicate individual identity and status, and vocalizations that signal sex and competitive ability. They made the decision to intensify their monitoring of Asali and his pride substantially, increasing the frequency of direct observations from the typical schedule, expanding their documentation protocols to capture as much detail as possible about every social interaction involving this unusual cub, and coordinating with other research teams studying lions in different parts of the Serengeti to compare Asali's social experiences with those of normally developing males in other prides to identify patterns and differences that might be attributable to his unique condition. The first critical test of how Asali's unusual appearance would affect his social acceptance came when he and his siblings were fully integrated into the broader pride at around 4 to 5 months of age, the typical time when cubs begin participating more actively in pride activities beyond just nursing from their mother and playing in the immediate vicinity of den sites. Lion prides generally show remarkable tolerance toward cubs, with all the adult females in a pride typically displaying maternal behavior toward all cubs regardless of which specific female gave birth to them. A system of communal care where females will nurse cubs that aren't biologically their own and will fiercely protect all cubs in the pride from external threats like hyenas, leopards, or strange male lions. This cooperative breeding system, where females share the burdens and benefits of raising young, is one of the key advantages of lion social living and contributes significantly to the relatively high cub survival rates in well-established prides compared to the dismal survival prospects of cubs born to solitary females. But this tolerance and communal care is based partly on cubs looking and acting like cubs, fitting the expected pattern of what young lions should be in terms of their appearance, size, behavior, and social signals. The question that concerned Dr. Mwangi and kept her awake at night as she reviewed her observation notes was whether Asali's unusual and increasingly obvious appearance as he grew would trigger different responses from pride members. Whether his lack of the subtle early signs of mane development that should have been appearing by now would cause confusion about his sex, or worse, whether it might somehow trigger rejection or aggression if pride members categorized him incorrectly as some kind of aberrant or unhealthy individual who should be excluded from the group. What the researchers observed over the following months, documented in hundreds of hours of direct observation and thousands of photographs and video clips, was remarkably heartening and provided the first indications that Asali's story might have a happier trajectory than the dire predictions suggested by theoretical concerns about the importance of normal appearance. The pride's adult females showed absolutely no apparent discrimination against Asali based on his increasingly obvious physical difference from his male sibling and from other young males in the pride. They groomed him during social bonding sessions along with his siblings, running their rough tongues over his coat in the affiliative behavior that reinforced social bonds and removed parasites. They allowed him to nurse when his mother was receptive to nursing and her milk supply was adequate, showing no preference for his normally developing siblings. They protected him from dangers with the same fierce devotion they showed to all cubs, intervening aggressively when threats like approaching hyena clans or dangerous megaherbivores like buffalo came too close to the vulnerable young. And they generally treated him identically to how they treated the other cubs in the pride, across every measure of social behavior that the researchers could quantify and analyze. Even more significantly and surprisingly, the dominant male, whose reaction the researchers had been particularly anxious about given male lions' complex and sometimes aggressive relationships with cubs, showed no negative response whatsoever to Asali's unusual and abnormal appearance. Male lions can be infanticidal toward cubs they don't recognize as their own offspring, using a combination of scent cues and timing information to make assessments of paternity. And there had been genuine theoretical concern among the research team that Asali's unusual appearance might somehow trigger uncertainty or suspicion that could potentially lead to aggression or rejection. But the dominant male, who had been present in the pride during the mating period when Asali was conceived, and who had clear paternity of this litter based on the timeline and the absence of any other males in the territory, accepted Asali completely along with his siblings, displaying the typical somewhat distant but ultimately tolerant behavior that pride males show toward their own offspring, occasionally interacting with the cubs during play sessions, but generally maintaining some separation while still providing the crucial protective presence that deterred infanticide attempts by outside males, and provided security that allowed the cubs to develop in relative safety. This acceptance and normal social integration continued as Asali grew through his first year of life and into his second, approaching the adolescent stage when the differences between his appearance and that of typical male cubs became increasingly and dramatically obvious to any observer, whether lion or human. His brother from the same litter, developing along the normal trajectory for male lions in this population, was showing increasingly clear and prominent signs of mane development, with the hair around his neck and shoulders becoming noticeably thicker, coarser, and darker, starting the transformation from cub to young male that would continue and accelerate through the next several years until he reached full physical maturity around age 5, with a complete, impressive mane that would define his adult appearance. Other young males in the pride from different litters and different ages were showing similar development appropriate to their respective stages, creating a clear visual contrast with Asali's utterly different appearance. But Asali remained completely maneless as he grew, his head and neck covered with the same relatively short, fine, tawny-colored fur that covered the rest of his body, giving him an appearance that was startlingly and dramatically different from any male lion that most people, whether researchers or tourists or wildlife photographers, had ever seen. He looked almost like an unusually large, heavily built, masculine female lion rather than a developing male, lacking entirely the characteristic feature that made male lions instantly recognizable, even to observers with no particular expertise in wildlife. His face, without the framing effect of a mane, seemed smaller and more exposed. His neck, without the thick protective hair, appeared more vulnerable and slender, despite actually being quite muscular and powerful. His overall silhouette lacked the impressive bulk and visual impact that the mane provided to normal males, making him appear less formidable and dominant than males of similar age, despite actually matching or exceeding them in terms of actual physical size, weight, and strength. Dr. Mwangi documented fascinating and complex social dynamics as Asali navigated the challenging adolescent period without any of the normal visual markers of his sex and developmental stage that would have helped other lions quickly and accurately categorize him and determine appropriate social responses. His behavior remained entirely typical for a young male lion in every respect that the researchers could measure and evaluate. He played with the characteristic roughness, intensity, and dominance displays that distinguished male play from the somewhat gentler and more cooperative play style typical of young females. He was beginning to show serious interest in hunting and would watch with rapt attention when the pride's adult females engaged in the coordinated hunts that provided the vast majority of the pride's food, clearly studying their techniques and beginning to understand the complex cooperation required for successful kills of large, dangerous prey. He was developing the deeper, more resonant vocalizations and the territorial awareness and patrolling behaviors that marked the gradual transition from dependent cub to subadult male, beginning to understand his future role as a territorial defender and dominant competitor. But his interactions with pride members and with lions from outside his pride revealed interesting and sometimes problematic patterns that suggested appearance did matter significantly, in some contexts, even when it didn't trigger outright rejection or prevent basic social acceptance. The pride's females, when interacting with the maturing Asali, sometimes seemed genuinely confused by the striking and cognitive dissonance-inducing mismatch between his increasingly masculine behavior, his large size, his deep vocalizations, and his complete lack of the mane that should have been developing, and that provided the primary visual cue for identifying males. Dr. Mwangi documented numerous instances where adult lionesses would initially approach Asali with the tolerant, relaxed body language and close personal space they routinely showed toward other females in the pride, apparently categorizing him as female based on his appearance, only to abruptly switch to the slightly more cautious, respectful, and spatially distant posture they adopted around young males when they got close enough to assess his scent, hear his vocalizations, and observe his behavior up close, all of which provided contradictory information that forced a recategorization. This pattern suggested that visual cues served as the first and primary level of assessment in social encounters, providing a quick initial categorization that determined approach behavior, but that this visual assessment was rapidly checked, and if necessary corrected by other sources of information, including scent, vocalization, and behavioral observation when the visual signals proved misleading or ambiguous. Similarly, young cubs in the pride, who were still learning the complex social rules and recognition skills that would allow them to navigate lion society successfully as they matured, seemed to take significantly longer to learn to treat Asali with the appropriate deference and caution they showed toward other young males, apparently needing more time and repeated interactions to form the association between this visually unusual, maneless individual and masculine status, male-typical rough play style, and the greater size and strength that made young males somewhat risky play partners for smaller cubs who could be accidentally injured during overly vigorous interactions. But the most significant and potentially dangerous challenges Asali would face came not from within his pride, where familiarity and repeated positive interactions had allowed for acceptance, despite his unusual appearance, but from interactions with unfamiliar lions from outside his social group, who relied heavily on rapid visual assessment to categorize individuals and determine whether they represented threats, mating opportunities, or competitors to be challenged or avoided. The critical incident that would test whether Asali could function as a male lion despite his lack of a mane came when he was approximately 2.5 years old, approaching the age when young males typically face increasing pressure and aggression from the dominant pride male, who begins to see them as potential rivals rather than as harmless cubs. And when they begin the gradual or sometimes abrupt process of dispersal that would lead to them leaving the pride permanently and either forming coalitions with other dispersing males or attempting to take over territories of their own by challenging and defeating established pride males. During this transitional and vulnerable period, the pride was approached by a coalition of 2 nomadic males, probably brothers or close relatives, based on their coordinated behavior and comfortable proximity to each other, who were searching for territory they could claim and a pride they could take over as they attempted to transition from landless wanderers to established territory holders with regular mating access to females. These challengers, observing the pride from a distance of several hundred meters as they approached, appeared to visually assess the defensive strength they would face, attempting to count how many adult males they would need to fight to take over this apparently attractive pride with multiple adult females and good territory. Based on their subsequent behavior, it seems clear that they saw only one adult male, The established dominant resident with his impressive dark mane, completely missing or miscategorizing Asali despite his substantial size because without a mane he simply didn't register in their perceptual categories as a male lion requiring consideration in their strategic calculations. The challengers approached with the confidence and direct purposefulness of two males who believed they faced a single opponent and therefore possessed numerical advantage that would dramatically increase their chances of success in the violent confrontation they were intentionally initiating. In lion territorial conflicts, numbers matter enormously, and a 2-against-1 situation strongly favors the challengers in most cases, often allowing them to drive out or even kill a single defending male who cannot simultaneously fight two opponents effectively. As Asali's story continues to unfold and his life progresses through the various stages that male lions navigate, he remains a powerful symbol of resilience, adaptation, and the complex reality that success in nature, as in human society, can be achieved through multiple pathways rather than only through conformity to a single standard template. His acceptance by his pride, his functional success as a territorial male despite his lack of a mane, and his reproductive achievement that ensures his unique genetics will be passed to future generations all testify to nature's flexibility, to the importance of actual capability over mere appearance, and to the reality that even the most iconic and supposedly essential features can prove to be less critical than we assume when individuals possess other compensating qualities, and when communities prove capable of looking beyond surface differences to recognize and value the substance beneath.